Hello everyone, and welcome back to Dr. Hollowed. Today, we're exploring the scariest things people have seen with their own eyes. These stories, ranging from the bizarre to the terrifying, come straight from those who've witnessed them firsthand. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell to join us on this haunting journey. Back in 2018, I was working as a field electrician doing new builds. This job was an existing building shell with high voltage lines coming in, so we needed to convert it to a lower voltage for the suite. This entails hanging a half-ton transformer from the ceiling and wiring it in the air. We used a chain hoist and a single point-eye bolt to hoist the transformer up. Very sketchy, but not the scary part. Someone within our company wired the line side of the wires to the mains before we had the load side connected to the transformer. Their reasoning was that since there's a breaker switch controlling the power feed, there's no real danger. Cue my partner, sitting halfway inside the transformer, on top of a 16-foot ladder, to wire up the load. At some point, they begin testing the power feed and ultimately flip on the main power, sending high voltage into the transformer. My partner was inside. The lights in the entire building dimmed and flickered, and a freakish blue glow illuminated the ceiling. The scream coming from the arcing electricity could be heard from 2 suites away. It was only powered for 5 seconds but managed to melt holes through the transformer's enclosure, the flexi tube we used to encase the wire, and a portion of the bus bar. My partner was still inside the transformer when it was all said and done, and in those first moments, I wasn't sure if I was looking at a living man or a dead body. Fortunately, and by some grace, he was entirely unharmed. For various reasons, someone made a plan to murder me. They managed to get into my office, attempted to stab me to death, failed, and then they took a hostage while screaming things at me. There was a bit of a standoff before one of my coworkers grabbed the knife and managed to subdue them. A ton of police, prepped for a hostage situation, came running in and cuffed the guy. When you think you've had a bad day at work, trust me, mine was worse. Guy got off with community service and counseling because he pleaded momentary insanity and the DA didn't like me. To this day, I still check the backseat of my car, don't sit with my back to doorways, and flinch every time I hear someone running up behind me on the street. I also have a million cameras and a beefy security system at my house. I've told all my friends and family that if I die mysteriously, they know who to tell the police about. Our almost 3-month-old puppy got kennel cough in February 2022 and died at the vet. He was fine one day, and then the next on life support at the vet's office. They called us in the middle of the night to come say our goodbyes because it wasn't looking good. I'll never forget what his little body looked like on the table. He was fighting so hard to live, but he just wasn't old enough or strong enough to fight it. I wanted to look at his little spotted paws for the last time so I could remember what they looked like. I wish I hadn't. They were jaundiced. What used to be this adorable shade of pink is now a pale yellow. It's still burned into my memory. I love you, Murphy. I miss you, little guy. The day I noticed a small tumor on my pet rat Daisy. She was far too old for surgery at 2.5 years, and I just got the feeling it would be an aggressive tumor. 2 months later, it was as large as her body was, and the evening she couldn't walk across the cage to say goodnight was one of the lowest days I've ever had. I personally had to euthanize her at home because all the vets were closed. It was 9 p.m., and I had a horrible experience at the nearest emergency vet, so I refused to go back there. I fed her favorite snacks, let her snuggle my hair while I wept, and let her sisters cuddle with her for the last time. Then I prepared everything I needed, using the CO2 method, and did what needed to be done. I made sure she was comfortable and cozy. At this point, I had stopped crying and was totally numb. I drank myself to sleep that night. I felt no emotions for 2 days after that, and then at work it hit me. I spent the better part of 2 hours sobbing in the fetal position on the floor of my work van on the side of the interstate. I love you, Daisy. I lived in BFE, Oklahoma, as a kid, and before I started school, I would stay with my grandma during the day. She lived right by a state highway, and when I say right by, I mean one of their driveways literally connected to the highway. The post office was across the highway, so we'd have to cross it to get her mail. Anyway, one day she had me wait in the yard, which also backed up to the highway, with no fence, just a drainage ditch, while she got her mail. She crossed the road, and apparently I took exception to the fact that I wasn't going with her like normal. My stubborn 4-year-old ass started crossing the highway at a normal pace, not bothering to look left or right but definitely strutting along with "I'm going to do it anyway" energy. Anyway, I suddenly heard tires screeching, and they were fucking loud. I looked left, and there was a huge 6-wheeled Ford farm truck coming right at me. Its wheels were locked up, white smoke was shooting out from both sides, and its bumper was nearly touching the asphalt. It was braking so hard. The driver was able to get the wheels unlocked and turn right before he hit me, and he ended up in the ditch between the highway and the yard. The driver absolutely saved my Darwin Award-nominated ass, and apart from a bit of damage to his truck, he was fine. As soon as he came to a stop, he actually jumped out and ran out of the ditch and over to me, picked me up, and got me out of the road. Keep in mind this guy is about 75 years old. It turns out he was one of our down-the-road neighbors whose family had been friends with my family for about 3 generations. My poor grandma saw the whole thing and came running back across the highway to get me. And after an hour of winching, profuse apologies from my grandma, and even a few laughs, he went on his way. It took me a while to realize the gravity of the situation I'd put myself in, and I always waved at him like a madman anytime we'd see him after that. To this day, I don't understand what happened at all because I am a committed atheist, and I absolutely know that ghosts, spirits, souls, and the like are just things humans evolved a sense of over thousands of years to make us understand loss and our place in the world. I might have had a waking dream. I might have somehow convinced myself of something that didn't happen. I might have had a joke played on me, however, it freaked me out. This is my story. You may need a comfy chair and a cup of tea. It was about 1995 or thereabouts, and I was working as a sales rep for a surgical sundries firm. My patch was London and the southeast of England. This particular day, I visited a client who was based in a big old, mid-Victorian house in a town along the south coast. Massive rooms, high ceilings, and huge doors. Total nightmare to heat. You get the idea. There are towns full of such beautiful buildings up and down the south coast for anyone not from the UK. Anyway, as usual, I was parked by the staff in an empty surgical room to wait for my client, and I can still recall looking out of these huge, gorgeous sash windows when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw one of the drawers open and surgical instruments leap out for lack of a more scientific description. There was much clattering on the floor. Much incredulous horror from me. Even now, almost 30 years later, I can still feel my cheeks blushing at the memory. I was absolutely rooted to the spot and all but rubbed my eyes like a cartoon character. A short time later, the door opened, and I was ushered from the room for the meeting. I think the nurse took one look at me, one look at the floor and open drawer, and had a look on her face as if to say, "Not again." I somehow got through the meeting, and as I was leaving, I asked the nurse whether I had seen what I thought I had seen. The nonchalant manner of the reply will always stay with me, in which I was told that during its grand history, when it was a private Edwardian family home, someone murdered someone else. The husband murdered the wife, the maid, or something of that sort. However, that particular room seemed to be the center of something, and it was quite a regular occurrence for the contents of the drawers to be arranged one way at the end of a day, only for things to be moved around by the time the business was opened up the next morning. I am a natural skeptic, a man of science, a person of reason, and I have disdain for superstitious nonsense. However, I just cannot explain it. It gave me the shivers for years afterwards, and despite my natural skepticism, etc., I am afraid that I never went back there again. With the passage of time, I think that more than likely, it was the staff just playing some kind of prank, and there was a wee motor behind the drawer and spring-loaded drawers or something. I do know I wasn't going to get close enough to find out. At the other end of my list of possible explanations is the theory of a multiverse, which has gained traction in recent years as we try to understand quantum theory and how to navigate the physics and math needed to arrive at the theory of everything. I do find it a neat possibility, and if so, is it possible that occasionally one universe somewhere crashed into our universe or what we perceive as being our universe? Who knows? I will be dust on the breeze long before humans are able to definitively say one way or the other. Nonetheless, it has seemed like a highly remote possibility over the last decade or so. Or, maybe I did have a waking dream and somehow embellished my memory of the event over time. I am open to suggestions. My cousin and uncle have gunshot wounds. Uncle died, but cousin lived. I grew up in what was Texas' most dangerous area. I saw a few other violent acts, but that stuck with me the most as I was 9 and in the car when it happened, yet I got no injuries. My own body after being stabbed after 40x that resulted in massive blood loss, a medically induced coma for a week, and my mom and dad being told to prepare. I saw the aftermath of this one, thankfully. Outside my old shop was a back road, and it was 11 p.m. and my guys were coming back from break. I heard a massive bang but didn't think anything of it until about 5 minutes later, when people were screaming for fire extinguishers and help. Apparently, a young teen verged into the lane and caused a head-on collision with an older woman, like a grandmother. The teen had the engine block pushed into her, and the car caught fire. We couldn't get them out in time and had to listen to the older woman scream, burning alive. The fire department didn't make it on time, as we were in the middle of nowhere. One of my guys, only 19 years old, was trying to pull them out but couldn't, so we all tried, but nothing could be done. He managed to climb into her car by breaking the window but couldn't get her out. He wasn't sure why. An older guy I had, a former Marine who saw combat, had to finally pull him out and tell us to stop. Just thinking about it reminds me of the smell. It's the worst thing you can imagine, and the screams. I had to call my general manager and explain it to him. He rushed over and told us to go home. He texted us in a group chat to have a week off, not to worry about production, as he was concerned we'd be distracted and injured ourselves, plus he genuinely cared. Set up a therapist hotline. Unfortunately, the 19-year-old took his life. The whole situation was fucked. If you've ever been in a situation where you feel useless, that's it. All we could do was listen for maybe 5 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. It was disturbing. I have never seen anything like it and hope I never do. I watched my dad lose control of his motorcycle on a turn, dropping the bike, which caused the tail end to fly over the handlebars, sending him flying through the air upside down to then land on his head or shoulder area just off the road. Talk about time slowing down. I can very vividly remember the image of him 5 feet in the air upside down. He was face down, totally motionless, and didn't seem to be breathing when I got him. He came to and was off in an ambulance before long. He broke his clavicle, cracked his scapula, and broke 3 ribs, on the back, but made a full recovery. My mom still won't let him get another bike. Kinda tame, but the scariest thing I've seen in person. A dog grabbed my dad's arm and attempted to drag him onto the ground. It was a yellow Labrador that was tied to a pole outside a shop. I was 7 and was walking along the street with my dad. I saw the dog staring at us and ignored it. As I was walking past, the dog lunged at me, but my dad shoved me away and took the blow. I just remember screaming and crying as my dad wrestled with this dog as it tried to drag him downward. There was a lot of blood, and the dog wouldn't let it go. Luckily, an on-duty police officer helped pry its jaws open. The dog did have to be put down because it had attacked multiple other people. My family and I, including 2 younger siblings, went to my uncle's house to cook out and have a small party. His girlfriend was there, and things were great until we decided it was time to go. The girlfriend was nervous and asked for a ride home. Uncle heard that and got mad, grabbing her purse and shoes and saying she could leave without them. The whole thing was strange to me, as I was around 12 or 14 and had a delayed understanding of what was going on. Next thing I know, I walk into the kitchen to see my uncle twisting his girlfriend's purse strap around her neck, trying to strangle her. My mom and his son get him off of her, and his mom comes over to calm him down. We and the girlfriend make our escape while he's kneeing his own mom in the face with his son literally on his back, choking him. I haven't seen or talked to him since. I never knew he was like that when drunk. It was a total shock. He was always fun to hang out with before that. I was on a first date, walking from a park to get ice cream. A couple was riding their bikes across the crosswalk to the other side of the street when the woman lost control of her bike and hit the curb. She flew across the sidewalk, body first, into a storefront with a single pane of glass, where she got stuck halfway. She was a heavy-set woman. Half her body and one arm were stuck inside the store, and she was alive and trying to pull herself out. It happened right in front of us, and the boyfriend was in shock and didn't move. I helped her out of the window and realized her tricep was mostly completely detached, and because she was heavy, the size of the detached area was about the size of a Pomeranian dog. My date was able to get bandages and towels from the store, and I just sort of tried to hold up the missing piece and wrap the bandage around it to hold it in place, and we called 911. I'll never forget the look on her boyfriend's face. The scariest look of fear I've ever seen. Total paralysis. She survived, luckily. My husband and I and our kids were waiting at a stoplight in the middle lane, and a woman was out of her car gathering clothes off the road that had flown out of the back of her truck. She was directly in front of our car when the light turned green. We caught eye contact with her and told her, "It's okay, we aren't going to drive." She panicked and tried to run back to the gas station where her truck was, but the lane to the right of us was open, so a giant truck came barreling through the light at like 40, didn't see her, and hit her right in front of us. She went flying. It was awful. We had to stay and give police statements. We were a wreck. I kept watching the news to see if she survived, but there wasn't any information. I panic and have PTSD anytime I see people cleaning trash by the road, jaywalking, or out of their stranded vehicles. It was terrifying. I was on the promenade in Nice when the terrorist attack happened in 2016. We were there on a family holiday, and my mom requested we cross over to the other side of the road due to the wind chill. It was a warm, vibey night, and a lot of families were out strolling after having seen the fireworks. A couple of minutes later, this truck ran over a large group of people and families, and then there were loud ear-piercing bangs. It took me some time to get over that incident, the scale of the tragedy and the suddenness of it. I used to love watching The Dark Knight as a movie, but the scene with the large tanker or truck had such vivid sound that it always triggered something in me. That sound of a large truck or truck racing used to trigger something in me. Thankfully, it's subsided in the last couple of years. Shallow water blackout while freedive spearfishing. 10+ years ago, I was much less experienced, and I was freediving with my much more experienced mentor to shoot groupers. He had surfaced and taken his first breath, so I thought everything was a-okay, and I grabbed his fish to help him brain it. The next thing I knew, he was slipping beneath the surface, unconscious. It took me far too long to register what was happening, and by that time, he had sank about 15 feet. I wasn't ready to dive yet, but I took a deep breath, chased after him, and caught up around 30 feet. I swam him up to around 10 feet before my diaphragm convulsions started to make me panic, and I darted for the surface. Luckily, our other friends had made it over by then and completed the rescue while I composed myself. Seeing my unconscious friend sink into 70 feet of deep, murky water was pretty haunting. Nowadays, freedive courses are readily available in most regions and teach standardized procedures for when your partner surfaces and how to do rescues, but that stuff was rare, hard to find, and expensive to book back then. I watched a car in front of me drive under the rear of an agricultural trailer behind a tractor at 50 miles per hour. Didn't brake, and the horn went immediately. The whole trailer shuddered and lifted off the floor, and then the lad just rolled out of the car, screaming with his ankle hanging off. For 30 or 40 seconds as I was sitting in shock, all I could hear was his yelling and screaming, and that horn just stuck on, droning on full blast. Will live with me for a long while longer. And how the fudge he only did his ankle in, I'll have no clue ever. Suzuki Swift just wows. His seat was squashed against the back of the car, and the passenger side was completely gone, right back to the boot itself. That moment between seeing and hearing him low into the trailer, me screeching to a halt across the road, and that space in time where he rolled out shit me up for weeks on end. Pitbull attack. I used to be much more open-minded about bully breeds until I witnessed what they were capable of. Even if there are a lot of them that are great dogs, the fact that the worst people always end up wanting one kind of puts a damper on it. I think you should need a license to own one and get jail time if they attack either a person or a dog, even if the damage isn't that great. I love dogs, so I'd never want them to be put down, but the breed should be bred out. Except for perhaps scientific purposes, the military, or something. Make them prohibitively expensive with mandatory insurance. Homeless folks or folks in the ghetto shouldn't be anywhere near them, and jealousy should be prosecuted. I know a lady who bought her kids a cane corso because, WTF? Obviously, they were not good caretakers, and the dog ended up causing a lot of damage. They had the dog for less than 6 months and had it put down because they didn't want it anymore. The business end of a handgun pointed at my face. I was a young college student walking into a grocery store. The cop came out of nowhere and yelled at me to take my hands out of my pockets. I looked up, and he had drawn his weapon. She said I fit the description of a bank robbery suspect. He told me to present my ID. He looked at it, then said he really stopped me because I was driving too fast and puking into the parking lot. For reference, I drove a 1994 Mazda 3 at the time. 0 to 60 in about an hour, so no fucking way. I threw my ID back at me and told me to be more careful, then walked off. Fun times. In my childhood home in Ohio, I distinctly remember playing some games on this old Dell computer, and how the house and its rooms were situated was normal but a bit weird. So I'm playing my game when, out of the corner of my eye, I see a shadow in the room next to my left. I think to myself that maybe a cloud passed by the window and reflected light or whatever the hell. Until I saw it again, and I actually turned and looked and saw a fucking nun standing there. They were in the usual attire, but their faces were elongated. I didn't watch horror movies growing up, so I knew nothing of The Conjuring or anything horror related to nuns. When I told you I ran up out of that house to the front yard real quick, I certainly did. Shortly after that, around nighttime when I'm trying to sleep, I would hear the songs of a heavy dog pacing. I could also hear a chain dragging behind it, whining and scratching, but the thing is that there were no dogs anywhere near my house, and where I grew up, there were no such things as stray dogs. It sounded like the thing would walk the hallways, then stop at my room, and then continue on. A few years ago, I was doing some chores, and my daughter was playing in her bedroom. I heard her scream the "I'm really hurt" scream. I ran in there, and she was absolutely soaked in blood. Her head, her face, her shirt, and the pillows on her bed. It was a horrifying amount of blood. For a second, I thought she was dying. I rushed her to the hospital and figured out that she had been jumping on her bed, fallen, and hit her head on the headboard. She had a nasty gash in her scalp and got 3 staples to close it up, but was otherwise totally fine. I had known intellectually that head wounds bleed a lot, but seeing it in person on my own kid no less was a whole different animal. On the plus side, when you walk into the emergency room with a blood-soaked toddler, they don't make you go sit in the waiting room. You get seen right away. When I was a child, we resided in a high-rise building where we often played in the hallway near the elevator. One day, I summoned the elevator, and upon the doors opening, I was greeted by complete darkness. This wasn't unusual, as sometimes the lights would fail and not be replaced promptly. As I was about to step in, with one foot suspended mid-air, a sudden instinctual pull held me back. Cautiously, I attempted to gauge the elevator floor's presence without fully stepping in. To my horror, there was nothing but empty space. I was just 9 years old then. Some time later, but not on the same day, I approached the ground floor elevator only to find large, ominous blood splatters near the doors. It appeared someone else had tragically fallen into the void. Their fate remains unknown to me. A couple of years ago, my wife slipped on our porch at night. I was inside and heard her shouting, but at first I assumed she was talking to our dogs, as she usually goes outside at night and calls for them in a playful or high-pitched voice. For some reason, on this occasion, something rubbed me the wrong way about it, and I peeked outside to see her lying face up on the ground crying. She had broken her arm and could not get up. What haunted me about this is that, had I not gotten that gut feeling, she might have been outside for a long time before I suspected anything was wrong. Furthermore, it was winter, so she might have gotten really cold and wet. In the days afterward, all I could think of was seeing her laying on the wet ground crying and unable to move, and then I had lots of terrible thoughts about her falling again, whether down the stairs, outside, etc. In my line of work, I've seen many injuries, but the one that truly frightened me was that of the one I love most, being helpless on the ground, combined with the thought that I could have missed it. I still have a heavy feeling in my heart about it sometimes, and I go to check things out right away if I hear her talking outside without immediately coming in. Imagine, if you will, that it's an early November morning and there's fog rolling in as you walk to your part-time job. It's early enough that the sun is barely staining the horizon with a watery gray light, and everything is eerily quiet, thanks to the fog. You're walking along the tree-lined path when you get this weird, pickling tingle at the back of your neck, like something is watching you. You look around, and there, less than a few feet away, are a pair of seemingly glowing sulfur yellow eyes, looking right at you. An icy feeling of primal dread trickles down your spine as they stand up, and before you can even think, with a low snarl, the inky black panther you thought was just a shadow under the bush leaps up and rebounds off the enclosure fence that's virtually invisible in the light fog. Such are the joys of working part-time at a wildlife park. Iraq 2003, a small convoy of HMMWVs slows in preparation for a left turn. A speeding car comes up behind us. I would conservatively estimate that they were going 100 miles per hour. They pull out to pass just as the lead vehicle starts its left turn. A speeding car slams into the driver's side of the HMMWV. No soldiers were injured. The Iraqis, on the other hand, none of them was wearing a seatbelt. We had to peel the driver off of the steering column. I splinted the open fracture in his arm and started in 4, had to find a vein in his foot, but there wasn't much that we could do besides assure them, Allah Kareem. It turns out that they had just swindled, robbed another party and were trying to get away as fast as they could. Fortunately, that was the most frightening thing that I personally saw while we were there. It was still early days of the invasion, and the Iraqis, for the most part, were quite happy that we were there. I still think about this incident a lot and wonder how life turned out for those other 2 guys. I lived next to a graveyard. One night I played Omaha on the old Pacific Poker website. I was with a friend. He went to the bathroom and left the door open so we could still talk about the hand I was playing. I looked over to speak in his direction, and in the kitchen window I saw a woman dressed in a Victorian-looking funeral gown. I could see detail down to the doily crocheted sleeves and veil over her face. She was glowing white or blue, exactly like what a full Dasani water bottle with a flashlight shining in it would look like. She was staring at me, and with emotion on her face, she said, without words, "What are you doing?" It was kind of like telepathy, but it was not. It was more like I instantly knew what she was thinking just by seeing her. I froze for a second and, in that moment, decided to jump up and run towards her to go open the door and see us face to face. Just before I made the move, when I was frozen in the instant, she floated from my perspective from left to right. She went right through the deck railing and was almost behind the door when I barged through it, and to my astonishment, she had disappeared. I 100% will stand behind this statement. I am sure of this happening, just like anyone who is lucid would be able to tell you events from their day. Now I have no idea what it was, why I saw her, or how to do anything like that again, but it was not the first or last time. I don't need to believe in anything. I have enough of my own verification of reality to say that almost anything can happen in one's life, as I have had many extraordinary experiences like this one. For whatever reason, it is clear that I am in a very rare category of person. I have a high IQ, I am successful in life, I am a reliable narrator, and I do not believe in organized religion. I have had multiple joint experiences where others have seen a phenomenon, mostly 5 people, 3 adults, 2 children. I can lucid dream, I have meditated my whole adult life, and I can switch levels of consciousness, like from sleep to sleep paralysis to awake with my own volition. I think this makes me unique, and I do wish I knew someone like me so that we could practice or do experiments in a way that could shed some understanding on what is happening. I have had more of these experiences than anyone I know. I was on a trip in the UK with my mom and my sister, visiting my dad, who lived there then. I was maybe 8 or 9-ish. Sometime in 2014, I think, and we were in the underground. We, my dad, mom, sister, and me, were heading down the stairs. I don't remember much else before this or what really even happened, but I remember walking down the stairs, and to my right was this elderly couple, and the man had fallen down on the stairs. He was unconsciously lying there, and there was blood on the stairs and on him, his head, etc., and the woman was there sitting next to him, like, screaming or yelling and crying. I'd for someone to help them, and I remember my dad just ushering me and my sister and my mom to the train quickly and just looking at them on the stairs and hearing the lady cry, etc. as the doors of the train closed. I don't remember what we even did that day. We never spoke of it, nor, as far as I know, in the few minutes of walking down the stairs onto the train, did anyone help them or explain what happened, but that's the scariest thing I've seen so far. But it's still in my mind after all these years, though the memory is more hazy. I probably repressed or suppressed it for some years after that. When I was about 16, so 99, 2000-ish, me and my friends were sitting in the kitchen of the old Victorian my parents owned in Maine. It was the middle of the night, and we were all bored sitting around in the kitchen playing a stupid game we used to call What Would You Do If? The premise is basically that you take turns asking your friends what they would do if X happened, and then you all laugh and come up with stupid answers. Well, it was my turn, and I pointed at the basement door and said, "What would you do if that door handle turned in the door?" I can't remember what the answers were, but within a couple seconds of me saying that and us laughing, the door handle jiggled in the door and popped open. We scared the living shit out of all of us, and we cleared the room very quickly. I was sitting on a butcher's block end table at the time, and when it happened, I knocked on a giant glass fruit bowl on the floor and shattered it. All these years later, there is no explanation. We had cats, but they did not go in the basement. So I guess that's the scariest, unexplainable thing I witnessed. The scariest real thing I've witnessed was probably a dude who was dying on the road after a gnarly motorcycle accident. I never found out if he made it or not, but as we drove past, he was lying in a pool of blood, twitching his fingers. I watched my grandfather shift between lucidity and what doctors thought was dementia. Mostly because the hospital was incompetent, the scarier part. The man was diabetic, and his glucose levels hadn't been monitored at the hospital he was in. When they finally do, I believe the number I overheard at some point was 800, but that could have been anything. He was hallucinating due to the severity of his condition, had a UTI they couldn't get rid of, and was just a mess. He sat there, telling me stories he'd told before. He was a railroad engineer for the LIRR and had tons of stories he'd share consistently. He met Truman once. I got an autograph and a picture with the president, Irk. Then the story would shift to him being chased by the police up an empty stairwell. And we'd known he'd shifted into hallucinating. He was a funny guy, a pisser to the end, as my dad would say. Because despite the shifting back and forth, he talked to me the most, my firstborn grandson, while he was in the hospital. And if other family members stopped by, he'd pretend to be asleep. He passed away 5 years ago, on Valentine's Day. We were out in the Atlantic at the tip of Monomoy Park, looking at the seals in a rented boat. This was around the time of all the great white shark sightings. We got a little too close to the steep bank, and the waves started picking us up and throwing the boat sideways towards the shore. The weather quickly changed to driving cold rain within minutes. Not another soul has been on site for hours and out of cell range. Boat started listing to the side, taking on water, and prop got stuck in the sand, so my buddy who was driving it told everyone to get out ASAP. I had to jump into the water, which may or may not have been shark infested, especially being next to the seals, and swim to shore. All our gear and cell phones were in the boat, and we were cold and wet, and it was raining hard. I had the sudden realization that we might be in a really bad situation soon. Not to mention expensive because the rented boat was about to capsize. It was right out of a Stranded type TV show. Was definitely scared out of my mind. My buddy made a last-ditch effort. He hit the wave just right and full throttled in reverse and was able to get the boat off the shore and unstuck. We all had to swim back to the boat. Bilge pumps got the water out and got back fine. None of us said a word the whole ride back, lol. But man, what a fun trip.